Thank you for the reading. And Sandy, did you want to say something about where the Apostles' Creed came from?
That was Miss Anderson's request.
Thank
you.
In speaking with the residents of Spruce Suites, so that was one of their suggestions, and we thank you for that. And it's good to hear the Apostles' Creed. This morning I want to introduce you to Carl. Carl is a very wealthy man. Well, in fact, he's the wealthiest man in the valley. Truth be told, actually, Carl owns the valley. And one of the things that Carl just enjoys more than anything else is going out, riding his horse, and surveying his lands. So he'll go to his stables, and he'll find one of his horses, and he'll get on the horse, and he will ride through the valley, looking at his farms, and his forests, and his animals. And he just enjoys that ride. But then one day, as he was riding, he came across a huge old oak tree. And as he got closer to the old oak tree, he could see that there was someone sitting underneath it. As he got yet a little bit closer, he saw that it was Old Hans. Old Hans was an old tenant farmer of his that had worked there, well, forever. And it was getting on in years, but he was sitting there, and as he got closer, you could see that he was bowed in prayer. And so Carl rode up on his horse, and when he stopped, Old Hans looked up and said, "Oh, I didn't see you coming. I was praying. I was giving thanks for my meal, for my food." Carl looked down from his perch, saw the coarse bread and cheese that Old Hans was going to eat and that he was giving thanks for, and not much to give thanks for there, he said. Old Hans just said, "Well, it's sufficient. It's enough for me. But I'm really happy that you are here, Carl. There's something I feel that I need to share with you. I'm not really sure how to do it, but it was in a dream." Carl said, "Well, I don't put much stock in dreams, but I always like a good story. Go ahead." And Old Hans, "Well, I was asleep, and I found myself in this most beautiful hall. It was absolutely gorgeous. It was so peaceful and so lovely. The people were so loving and caring and so beautiful, so handsome. I've never seen anything like it. But then one of the gentlemen in the hall came up to me and said, 'Hans, there's something that we want to share with you. There's something that we want to tell you.' 'But what is it?' said Hans. 'We just want you to know that the richest man in the valley is going to die tonight.' And Hans was so shaken by the news, he woke up immediately, and well, since it was almost lunchtime, he found the old oak tree, sat under it, and was giving thanks just when Carl, the richest man in the valley, showed up. Well, Carl was not thrilled with the story, as you can imagine. He's like, "I've never heard such nonsense. Poppycock!" He whirled his horse around. Who would tell such a story to someone? He was upset. Old Hans felt bad, but all he could do was bow his head in prayer once more and pray for Carl. But Carl, still muttering under his breath, "Who would share such a nonsense? It's just a dream, come on." And as he's riding down the road, he started to feel a twinge in his back. You know that tough to reach spot between the shoulder blades that you can never scratch? Just a twinge in there. And as he kept riding and he got closer to the stables, the pain had gone up into his neck. And by the time he had put away his horse, he had a terrible headache. And by the time he found his way back to his house, he felt feverish. He knew that he was coming down with something. So he summoned the doctor. And since it was Carl, the doctor came right away. You didn't keep Carl waiting. So the doctor showed up, and Carl explained the story, the dream that old Hans had told him. And the doctor kind of laughed and said, I wouldn't put a whole lot of stock in what old Hans has to say in his old dreams. I wouldn't worry about it a whole lot. But we'll check you out just to be sure. So an hour of poking and prodding and this test and that test, and after a whole hour of that, the doctor said, you're fine. You're as strong as one of those horses that you're always riding around. You're fit as a fiddle. And about the time that Carl opened his mouth to say something to the doctor, the door opened, a messenger came in and shouted to the doctor, Doctor, come quick! Old Hans, he just died in his sleep. The richest man in the valley. The richest man in the valley. Moral of the story, if God calls you to be a prophet, run. Well, maybe not that. Maybe that's not the one. But it's probably one that Jeremiah would have agreed with. Jeremiah was a young man. Scholars aren't exactly sure how old exactly Jeremiah was, but they're guessing he was probably in his late teens to early 20s. Late teens to early 20s, and here is God coming to him and saying, I want you to go to princes and kings, and I want you to tell them that they're not doing right. I'd rather not, God. Thank you very much. In a culture and in a time when age was respected, how could God expect this young boy to turn the world on top of its head? But that's exactly what God was asking Jeremiah to do. Now the passage starts out basically with a preamble, a boilerplate prophet. The word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. The word of the Lord came to me. This is almost boilerplate. You can read most of the prophets. You'll see it somewhere in there generally. The word of the Lord came to me. It's basically boilerplate saying, these are not my words. These are God's words. You better sit up and pay attention. You see that in almost every book of the prophets in the Old Testament. A little bit more interesting is the next phrase about how God knew Jeremiah before he was born. No, even before he was conceived, God knew Jeremiah. And we don't have too much trouble with that. We believe God is God of past, present, and future. God knows all things, omniscience, and that's in our Apostles' Creed. It's in there. So we believe that, and we don't have too much trouble with that. What's more interesting is the next part. That God had set Jeremiah apart to be a prophet to the nations. Did you catch that little part? It's not to the nation, it's to the nations, plural. This is a little bit more unusual. Most of the prophets were prophets to either Judah or Israel or the combination of the two. But most prophets were not called to be a prophet to the nations. But here Jeremiah is being told, you are a prophet to the nations. It's not exactly unheard of. Do you remember another guy by the name of Jonah? The guy that was swallowed by the big fish. He was sent to Nineveh. That was not part of Israel. So it's not exactly unheard of. But what is truly interesting to me, what is truly exciting to me as I read this part of the story, of Jeremiah's story, is Jeremiah's response. Because it is so very human. I'm calling you, Jeremiah. Me? Who? Me? You must be talking to that guy over there, or that woman over there. I'm just a boy, God. I'm only 18, 19 years old. Come on, you can't be me. There's got to be somebody else. Sound familiar? Ever heard yourself saying that a time or two? And that's what I like about the stories of the Old Testament and throughout the Scriptures. They don't sugarcoat the characters. They are real human beings, real people. And Jeremiah is no different. And actually, Jeremiah's refusal is not that unusual either. You remember another guy, Moses? This is a guy who climbed a mountain to see a burning bush. And the bush is talking to him, and he sits there arguing with the bush. Now, God gets a little bit upset with Moses. I can maybe see why. But Moses was a little bit older, too. But with Jeremiah, God is almost putting on kids' gloves. Can you see how God is reassuring Jeremiah? I knew you. I knew you before you were born. I knew you before you were conceived. I have set you apart. Where I send you, you will go. What the words I give to you, you will say. And to worry. Don't be afraid to talk to the princes and the powers and the kings, because I am there with you every step of the way. I'll never leave you. And then I hate to tell anybody to close their eyes during the sermon, but can you see it? God reaching down like a mother or like a father and touching Jeremiah's mouth. These are my words. I'm giving you my words. They're mine. They're not yours. Don't worry. You will go to the nations. I'm setting you up over kings and over nations to share my words and to share the love that I have. Oh, you will go into places and you will have to dig up. You will have to tear down. You will have to destroy. You will have to demolish. But you will also be planting. And you will be building. Go and be my prophet. It's a truly beautiful scene if you allow yourself to open up and see Jeremiah's fear and to see yourself. I certainly see myself. Gifts. I have been told that I have a gift. That I have a gift of being able to deliver a message. My mom has said it. My dad has, surprise, my dad even said it. My sons tell me, well, at least we don't go to sleep while you're talking. My poor wife is still with me, even though she has to listen to portions of these sermons 2 or 3 times every week before they deliver on Sunday. She's still with me. So does close family count? But I tell you, the first time I got up to give a sermon, it was a complete and total, utter disaster. But before I get to that, I'll give you a little background. I've always felt close to the church. As a boy, let's just say family life was not always pleasant. And so we lived on a farm. It was every once in a while a good thing for me to go out in the pasture, find a place where no matter where I looked, 360 degrees, there was nothing touched by human beings. It was just grass, and hills, and blowouts, and nature. And I could there feel peace. When we moved to town, it was a little hard to get to the farm. And so what I found myself doing was going to church. There was almost never anyone there. But the church's doors were always unlocked. And I could go in there, and I could sit in the sanctuary, and I could fill myself with that peace and that quiet and that calm that I didn't always have at home. I grew up going to Sunday school. I grew up going to youth group and vacation Bible school. But when I graduated from high school, you know that line of death that you stand in shaking hands with 1,000 people you don't know? The pastor of our church came through the line. When he came up to me and shook my hand, he said, "Dirk, have you ever thought about becoming a pastor?" I don't know what I said. I don't remember what I said to him, but I'm pretty sure what was going through my head was that, no way, I'm God's No, I'm not going to do that. Then I went to college. Went off to college, and one of the first things I did was I found a church, a campus church, campus ministry. I joined the choir. And it wasn't too long after that that the pastors, there were two of them, came up and asked me to be on the student ministry team. There were going to be 4 people, and we were to do student ministry. I'm like, sure, you're going to pay me a little bit to do this? Yes, sure. Money's good. And they even sent me to St. Louis for a little training. But the idea of going into pastoral ministry still wasn't really registering in my head. But you could see how God was planting. You could see how God was planting. Graduation from university came, and I really hadn't put much plan or thought into what I was going to do after graduation. I was busy with classes. I was busy writing an honors thesis. I was trying to get all this, and like suddenly it dawned on me, I have no plan for after graduation. What am I going to do? So I liked school, and the church has always been good. And I saw an application form to Southern Methodist University Seminary, and the application date is past, but we'll send it in. We'll just apply to Southern Methodist. We'll see if I can get in. I got in. Can you see God was opening a door? They even gave me a scholarship. I applied late, and they still gave me a scholarship to go down. I hadn't been there 2 weeks, and things started to go downhill. For one thing, I developed ringworm all over my legs. I didn't know what was going on. I developed a pain in my back and a suffering, a headache for 2 weeks and a pain in my back. And I'm like, God, is this really what I'm supposed to be doing? All of this. My grades started. I hadn't seen anything but an A since elementary school. I think I got a B+ in art. My grades started to slide, and I was really getting frustrated. And then my church called and said, "Would you preach to us on Sunday?" One Sunday coming up. What do you do when your hometown church calls and says, "Would you preach?" You're in seminary. What are you supposed to say? No? So we set up a date, and I went back from Dallas to western Nebraska. I drove back, get there, and I prepared the sermon. I'd worked hard. It was written out in a manuscript. I worked so hard on that. I was proud of it, and got there that Sunday. Of course, there was a different pastor. It wasn't the pastor that I knew from high school. But he was very nice, and he gave me one of those white servant robes that are really hot and really uncomfortable, and that's probably why I don't wear a robe today. And I got up and I gave that sermon. And after I was done, I looked out at the congregation, and most of them were half asleep. Now, they were nice enough. They came up and said, "Oh, it was wonderful. You did a good job. You did fine. You did great." But I was not happy. I was not happy with it. So I went back and I was like, "God, I'm too young. God, I can't do this." I was nearly 2 years into seminary. I had 1 semester of seminary left, and then I was going to do an internship and then go into pastoral. They were going to give me a church. God, I'm not ready. And so all of my friends started coming to me that I'd known through college. And most of them were from East Asia, Southeast Asia, Taiwan, Malaysia, Singapore, that region. And they're like, you hang out with us so much anyhow. Why don't you come see where we live? Come see our home. So I did. I went there. I lived and taught in Taiwan for 2 years. Came back and got the law degree. That was 3 years. And then went back for another 15 years to Taiwan. But what God was doing during that time, and this is really about God. God was tearing down. God was digging up. God was destroying. God was demolishing all of my excuses. All of my excuses. I was no longer so young. I started to have a little white in the hair. I was a much better speaker. After teaching in Taiwan for 15, 16, 17 years, I got more comfortable standing up in front of people, able to deliver a talk, a lecture, a speech. In fact, I taught speech on occasion. I was much more comfortable doing that. I learned about accounting because we opened our own little school. And I read the accounting book. I wouldn't say I'm an accountant, but I know how to read a financial statement. Pretty helpful when you're in a finance committee meeting. But most of all, living as a foreigner in a foreign land, I learned compassion. And that was maybe the biggest hurdle of all. Overcoming some of my pride, some of my arrogance, and some of my, never having anything but an A. I learned a little bit about compassion, living as a foreigner in a foreign land. God was destroying, tearing down, digging up those things within me that were holding me back from what God had called me from a very early age. And that's what God does. It's hard to understand sometimes. It's really hard to understand why do we have to go through all of this. But I think each and every one of us, if we stop and think about our lives, some of those difficulties, some of those hard times that we went through, maybe that's where God was digging up, where God was tearing down, where God was demolishing and destroying some of the things within us that were holding us back from becoming who we were meant to be. It happened with Jeremiah. Jeremiah, God put his hands on his mouth. It was what Jeremiah needed to bring him up, to bring him to who he needed to be. That's what God does. Because as much as God digs up, tears down, destroys and demolishes, God plants. God plants and God builds. And that's what God desires to do in each and every one of our lives, if we let Him. If we let Him. I ask each and every one of you, think about your gifts. Think about whether you are 5 or 105. What are your gifts? What has God given you? How can you use those gifts? How can you let God build and plant and grow you to be the person you're meant to be? I'm still learning. I got a long ways to go. But with your help, with God's help, we'll help each other. And we'll become who God meant us to be. Just like Jeremiah. God bless. Amen.